It is my honor to introduce mindfulness speaker and author of the highly acclaimed book, The Mindfulness Edge, Matt Tenney.
I'd like to start off with a question for you, if that's okay. The question is, if there was one skill that you could develop that affected positively, had a positive impact on at least 90% of your results, maybe closer to 100% of your results, would you agree with me that developing that skill would be a pretty good use of your time? Yes. Now, imagine that in order to develop this skill, you didn't need to add anything to your schedule. Right? You could just change the way that you do things that you're already doing every day, anyhow. Now it almost sounds too good to be true, right? Well, there is such a skill. It is the skill of self-awareness. So self-awareness is the most critical skill for leaders to develop, and for any human, for that matter. Because it's a meta skill. It affects essentially every aspect of leadership. And I have never met a leader who disagrees with this. However, I meet very few people who intentionally train to develop and improve their self-awareness on a daily basis. And I used to wonder why that is. And I've done some research, and I think I've come up with a couple good answers for this. One is that, probably the most likely answer, is that many people just simply don't know that there are proven tools for intentionally training and improving self-awareness. Also, even if you do know, as I'm sure we're all aware, breaking old habits and developing new ones is really hard, right? But I think probably the biggest obstacle is that many people already think that they're self-aware and that there's no room to improve in that area, right? In fact, one of the leading researchers in self-awareness in that field is an organizational psychologist named Dr. Tasha Eurich. And she's assessed hundreds, probably thousands of people at this point on their self-awareness. And I'm curious what you think here. On average, as a percentage or out of every 100 people, how many people would you guess self-report as being either somewhat or very self-aware? What do you think out of 100? 90? 70? Yes, the answer is 95%. Hopefully you weren't looking at the screen because I just gave away the punchline there. How many people do you think actually are? Oh my gosh, how did you know that? Roughly 10 to 15%. So the vast majority of us are going around deluding ourselves most of the time. Now, what I'd like to do with the short time here that we have this morning is share some simple but proven tools for systematically training to improve self-awareness in a way that doesn't require you to add anything to your schedule. So it allows you to develop a new habit in a pretty seamless way. And I think this image actually sums it up pretty well, believe it or not. So it's kind of having, just like this little fella looking in the mirror and having an objective third-person awareness of our own minds and bodies. So it's just like seeing ourselves in the mirror to some degree. So mindfulness training, essentially by definition, is self-awareness training. It is a systematic way of improving self-awareness. And there is now a pretty large and rapidly growing body of research in the field of neuroscience suggesting that mindfulness not only changes the function of the brain, but even the physical structure of the brain in ways that help us to be more self-aware. And in fact, physical changes, cortical thickening, has been noticed in as little as 2 weeks of training in mindfulness. Many people often think of self-awareness and these types of things as the soft skills, right? However, developing high levels of self-awareness is actually the fastest way that you can make a positive impact and improve your impact on the P&L, on the bottom line. And here's why. So if you were to look at decisions that leaders have made that are suboptimal, to be polite here, that are not the best decisions, in almost every case, what I think you'll find is it's not a lack of knowledge that creates that poor decision, right? Think of yourselves. You all know your industry. You know your business. You know your company, right? It's not a lack of knowledge that results in the poor decisions. In almost every case, what's creating a suboptimal decision is this subtle cognitive issue. It's a psychological issue called a cognitive bias. So for those of you not heard of this term, this was first coined in the 70s by Daniel Kahneman, who's now a pretty famous author. And he actually won a Nobel Prize for this work on cognitive bias and as it relates to behavioral economics. So what a cognitive bias is it's this bias for making a decision that is usually unconscious, and it's kind of ingrained into us, it's conditioned into us, that causes an otherwise rational person to make an either irrational or suboptimal decision. All right, so here's an example that's pretty easy to follow, I think. So imagine you're like this guy. It's a Saturday, and you've just wasted 8 hours sitting on the couch, binge watching whatever you like on Netflix. I don't know what that is for you, maybe Game of Thrones or something, right? But whatever it is, you've just wasted 8 hours of your life watching Netflix, and you've got 2 hours to go. And you think, you know, I should stop and go do something more productive, like spend time with my family or go to the gym or get some work done. But then your mind creeps in and says, but if I don't finish those last 2 hours, then the first 8 hours are just a complete waste, right? That's irrational, right? You're never going to get those first 8 hours back. So if you've already determined that it's a better course of action to do something else right now, then spending another 2 hours does not make the first 8 hours any better, right? We all agree with this, right? Rationally, but you know this happens to us, right, when we're caught in it. Now, this is just kind of a silly example from our personal lives, but I'm sure we can all think of examples like this that we've seen in businesses or organizations or even small teams, right, where we've invested a lot of resources into something, time or money. Then after a year or 2 years or whatever the case may be, it becomes really clear that this is no longer the best course of action. We should stop immediately and do something else. But because we've invested time and money, we say, well, that would be a waste if we stop now. Let's try a little bit more. Let's see if we can turn this around, right? So the reason I'm mentioning this is called the sunk cost bias. The reason I'm mentioning this one is because, as it turns out, mindfulness training might be the best way to become free from cognitive bias. And there's some pretty interesting research on this particular bias, the sunk cost bias. It was conducted at INSEAD, which is a kind of an Ivy League level MBA school in Europe, and they have campuses in Asia as well. So researchers at this prestigious university had this hypothesis that mindfulness training could help you to be more free from cognitive bias and make better decisions. So they started off just by pairing a group of people who were generally not very mindful versus a group of people who were generally mindful. They have trait mindfulness. And they asked them to play a decision-making game where the sunk cost bias often wreaks havoc on people's decisions. And as they expected, the people who were generally more mindful performed a little bit better than the people who were not. So it got them a little excited, and they said, well, let's take this a step further. So here's where it gets really interesting. What they then did was they took a group of people, divided them in half, and they gave one half of that group, they gave them 15 minutes of guided mindfulness training. The other half, they did not give any mindfulness training and just asked them to think, to develop thinking skills. And the people who received just 15 minutes of mindfulness training were 50% less likely to be affected by the sunk cost bias and make a bad decision. Think about this. Imagine a team of leaders with just 15 minutes of training. You can reduce the likelihood of a suboptimal decision by 50%. Now, if you can do that in 15 minutes, imagine what you could do with consistent daily practice. So how do we develop this skill of mindful self-awareness? Well, to kind of rehash a little bit and go a little bit deeper into what this is. So we're not trying to get rid of thinking or block thoughts out as many people think of when they first hear about mindfulness. What we're talking about here is having, again, being able to see our thoughts with third-person objectivity, almost like it's a thought bubble like this, or a heads-up display. Instead of what normally happens for us about 95% of the time is we're caught up in our thinking and oftentimes distracted by it. So maybe another visual would be like, if this is our awareness and this is our thinking, for most of us, I think if we're really honest, we spend about 95% of the time like this, right? There's no space. The moment that we become mindfully self-aware, this happens. So now there's some space between awareness and the mind and its thoughts, kind of like this thought bubble, and we can see them objectively without being controlled by them or without being distracted by them. And many people actually come to the practice just to be better at not being so easily distracted so they can have better focus. And I'm sure you can all relate to this to some degree. Like you've all been in a meeting like this one, and you're really trying to pay attention, right? And then this thought comes up about being on the beach on vacation. You're like, no, I'm in a meeting, right? And then that thought comes back because it's really nice. It starts grabbing more of your attention. And then you're like, no, I got to be in the meeting. And then bam, you're gone, right? So you're at the beach, you're enjoying it, and you really want to enjoy the beach, but then another thought comes up about puppy unicorns. And you're like, no, I know they're cute, but I just want to be at the beach, right? And then it comes back because they're just so doggone cute. And you're like, no, I just want to be at the beach. And then bam, you're totally absorbed in how doggone cute puppy unicorns are. And then you're back in the meeting and you go, oh crap. I have no idea what anyone has said during the last 2 minutes. Has that happened to anyone here besides me? Okay, just out of curiosity, has it happened to anyone during this talk so far? Yeah? That's okay. I'm not mad at you. This is just kind of what happens. I actually believe this is the ultimate paradigm shift. And here's why I say that. So let's think about these 2 hours of activities that we just listed out. What are these like for us for the most part? What we're doing is we're rushing through them, right? So we can get on to the next thing that we think is important or exciting. And as a result, we're a little bit more anxious afterwards, which makes us less effective at whatever we're going to do next. At the same time, we're reinforcing a bad habit of being identified with our thinking, distracted by it, instead of being self-aware. And perhaps the worst part of this is that we're not really there. We're not living that moment of our lives. So when we integrate mindfulness training into these activities, all of this is turned around 180 degrees. So first, as you probably noticed, when you wash your hands in mindfulness, it's actually pretty relaxing. Anything that you do with awareness is relatively relaxing, and you'll notice that your anxiety levels actually go down a little bit, meaning that you're going to be more effective at whatever you're going to do next. At the same time, you are actually rewiring your brain little by little in ways that help you to be more self-aware, which is the most critical leadership skill you can develop. And perhaps most important is that you're actually living that moment of your life. And as a result, you might find that you're a little happier and that you're enjoying your life a little bit more. And you might find that you're even a little bit more kind to the people around you and bringing a little bit more happiness to others. And I think if we were to pause and just reflect for a moment, if we really think about this, this is pretty much what life comes down to, doesn't it? It's, are we enjoying our lives? Are we happy? And are we helping other people? Are we being kind to other people? I mean, this is it, right? In the end, it doesn't really matter how much money we make, how much crap we buy, all the things that we did. I mean, what's really going to matter is, were we happy and were we kind? And I think deep down, we all know this, right? This isn't rocket science, but it's just easy to forget when we get caught up in the day-to-day. Well, one beautiful aspect of mindfulness is that with mindfulness training, this doesn't have to be some lofty aspiration or some far-off, like this is how I want to live. This can, when you're integrating mindfulness training into your daily life, this can become your living daily reality. Where yes, you're continuously improving as a leader to perform better as a leader, while at the same time living a happier and deeply meaningful life. Well, thank you very much for your kind attention this morning. Thank you.